Name. The word hung in the humid evening air, not so much a question as a gatekeeper's challenge. Bethany Drake shifted her weight, the gravel of the country club driveway crunching softly beneath her boots, a habit she hadn't quite broken, wearing practical footwear even when the rest of her attire suggested a casual evening out. She adjusted the hem of her royal blue top, a fitted, short-sleeved, moisture-wicking shirt that hugged her torso with an athletic precision the woman behind the table clearly found distasteful. "Bethany Drake," Bethany said, her voice dropping into that calm, flat register she had perfected over the last decade. It was the voice that cut through static, the voice that kept panic at bay when warning lights turned red. It was a voice that seemed entirely out of place here, amidst the floating balloons and the faint, tinny bass of early 2010s pop music drifting from the open pavilion doors. The woman seated behind the registration table didn't look up immediately. She was busy adjusting a glittery name tag that read "Event Chair" in aggressive, swirling font. Tiffany Miller. Bethany remembered her. 10 years ago, Tiffany had been the arbiter of social death at Ridgewood High, a girl who wielded exclusion like a scalpel. Now she was a woman who wielded a clipboard with the same menacing intent. Tiffany finally lifted her gaze, her eyes sweeping over Bethany's long blonde hair, which was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail, and then down to the blue shirt. "Oh," Tiffany said, a slow, sugary smile spreading across her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Bethany, we weren't sure you were actually going to show up." She turned to the woman beside her, a brunette named Jessica who had been Tiffany's lieutenant since the 7th grade. "Jessica, look who it is. The ghost of the back row." Jessica looked up from her phone, snapping her gum. "Wow, you look exactly the same, Beth. Did you just come from the gym?" Bethany didn't blink. "I came from work." Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh, picking up a pen and tapping it rhythmically against the table. "Right, work. We heard you were doing some sort of government contract thing. Or was it security? I forget. Honestly, when we sent the invite, we all made a bet on whether you could even get the time off. Shift work can be so demanding." "I found the time," Bethany said, her eyes tracking the movement of Tiffany's pen. It was a threat assessment habit she couldn't turn off. Hands, eyes, exits. Tiffany was no threat, just a nuisance, but the adrenaline of the environment was spiking Bethany's baseline. Tiffany flipped through the pages on her clipboard, making a show of running her manicured finger down the list of names. Drake, Drake. She frowned, her brow furrowing in mock confusion. "That's so strange. I don't see you on the confirmed list, sweetie. Did you pay the deposit? It was due 3 months ago." "I paid," Bethany said. "I have the confirmation email on my phone." Tiffany waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, the system was glitchy. If you're not on the master list, you're not on the list. We have a strict head count for the caterer. It's a sit-down dinner, very elegant, not really a grab-and-go situation." She gestured vaguely at Bethany's blue shirt, which might be for the best considering the dress code was cocktail chic. There were people walking past them now, former classmates in suits and cocktail dresses, casting curious glances at the scene. Bethany stood alone on the wrong side of the table, the subject of a public dressing down that felt engineered. And it was. The invitation had been persistent. Emails, Facebook messages, even a text from a number she didn't recognize. They had wanted her here, not to catch up but to compare, to verify that the quiet girl who sat alone at lunch and never wore the right brands was still beneath them. "I traveled a long way to be here, Tiffany," Bethany said, her voice remaining steadily low. "And we appreciate the effort, really," Tiffany cooed, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be overheard by the growing line behind Bethany. "But we can't just let anyone wander in. It's a safety issue. Plus, the open bar is expensive. We can't have people taking advantage of the alumni funds if they haven't contributed to the legacy." Behind Bethany, a man chuckled. It was a low, sneering sound. She recognized it without turning around. Brad Heston, the former quarterback, now sporting a receding hairline and a suit that was too tight across the shoulders. "Come on, Tiff. Let her in," Brad said, stepping up beside Bethany and looking her up and down with a predatory smirk. "If she didn't pay, she can work it off. Maybe help clear the plates? She looks like she's used to manual labor. Look at those arms." Bethany looked at her own arms. They were defined, corded with muscle built from hauling gear bags, climbing maintenance stands, and wrestling flight controls under G-load. To Brad, they looked like labor. To her, they looked like survival. She felt the heat rising in her neck, not from embarrassment but from a profound, simmering irritation. This was the battlefield. This was the high ground these people had fought to hold for 10 years. It was pathetic, but it was also trapping her. She could feel the walls of their perception closing in, reducing her complex, high-stakes life into a caricature of failure just because she wasn't wearing satin. "I'm not clearing plates, Brad," Bethany said, finally turning to face him. "And I'm not asking for a favor. I paid my dues." Tiffany sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of martyrdom. "Look, I don't want to make a scene. It's just awkward. Everyone else made an effort. You show up in a t-shirt, demanding access. It's disrespectful to the class. Tell you what, you can go wait in the overflow lot. If there are no shows after the first hour, I'll text you. Assuming you have a phone that gets service out here." The disrespect was the trigger. Not the insults to her clothes, but the question of her integrity. The implication that she was lesser, that she didn't belong in their airspace. Bethany closed her eyes for a split second. In the darkness behind her eyelids, the humidity of the country club vanished. The smell of cut grass and cheap cologne was replaced by the acrid scent of JP8 jet fuel and burning circuitry. The sound of pop music was drowned out by the rhythmic, chest-thumping whump 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 of rotor blades slicing through dry desert air. She saw the glint of a silver wing pinned to a uniform, tarnished by dust but heavy with meaning. "Dust-off is inbound," a voice crackled in her memory. "Hold the line." She opened her eyes. The flash echo faded, but the steel it left in her spine remained. She wasn't just Bethany Drake, the class reject. She was a Chief Warrant Officer 3 in the United States Army. She was an unexpected variable in an equation Tiffany Miller didn't understand. "I'll wait," Bethany said softly, "but not in the lot." She turned on her heel, ignoring Brad's scoff and Tiffany's victorious smirk. She walked away from the pavilion, moving with a purposeful stride toward the edge of the manicured lawn where the golf course stretched out into the twilight. "Where are you going?" Jessica called out, her voice shrill. "The bathrooms are the other way." Bethany didn't answer. She reached into the pocket of her tactical cargo pants, the ones they had mistaken for cheap trousers, and pulled out a heavy-duty encrypted smartphone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone they expected. It was military-grade hardware. She dialed a number from memory. It wasn't a contact list scroll. It was a direct line. "Operations." A crisp voice answered after one ring. "This is Apache 6-4, Bethany said, her voice shifting instantly from the defensive tone of a bullied girl to the authoritative command of a pilot in charge. "Authentication Whiskey Tango Foxtrot 9er. Go ahead 6-4. I'm at the LZ coordinates previously discussed for the extraction drill. The civilian timeline has shifted. I have hostile terrain at the entry point, requesting an expedited arrival for the transport element." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of typing. "Copy that 6-4. The flight of 2 was already spinning up for the transition. We can divert for a low approach and landing at your grid. ETA 6 mics. Is the LZ cold?" LZ is a golf course driving range. Clear of obstacles. Large gathering of civilians near the perimeter. Make it a show of force. Over. A chuckle came through the secure line. "Roger that 6-4. Show of force authorized. Keep your head down. Out." Bethany slid the phone back into her pocket. She stood at the edge of the driving range, the lush green grass stretching out before her. Behind her, the party was getting louder. She could hear Tiffany recounting the interaction, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Can you believe she tried to crash? Like, honestly, I feel bad for her. It's sad, really. Some people just never launch." Bethany checked her watch. 6 minutes. She crossed her arms, feeling the fabric of the blue top stretch across her shoulders. They thought she hadn't launched. They thought she had stayed on the ground, stuck in the mud of their hometown, while they soared on the wings of sales commissions and leased luxury cars. They had no idea that while they were fighting for parking spots at the mall, she was fighting crosswinds in the Hindu Kush. They didn't know that while they were navigating office politics, she was navigating a $30 million attack helicopter through mountain passes at 200 miles per hour in pitch blackness. The injustice of it burned, but it was a cold burn. It was the fuel she used to focus. She watched the horizon, where the sun was dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Back at the registration table, the line had thinned. Tiffany and Jessica were sipping champagne, congratulating themselves on maintaining the standards of the reunion. Brad was leaning against a pillar, holding court with a group of guys, gesturing with a beer bottle. "She probably went to cry in her car." Brad laughed. "I give it 10 minutes before we see her driving off in some beat-up Honda. I should have taken a picture." Jessica giggled. "For the newsletter. Don't let this happen to you." Tiffany swirled her glass. "No, don't be mean. It's just standards, you know. We can't have people who don't respect the vibe. If she had just worn a nice dress and acted humble, maybe I would have let her slide. But the attitude, walking up here like she owns the place. Please." She's probably waiting tables at a diner. That shirt looked like a uniform for a gym staff. The air began to change. It started as a vibration in the ground, a subtle trembling that rattled the champagne flutes on the registration table. Tiffany frowned, putting a hand on the stack of name tags to steady them. "Is that the DJ?" she asked, looking toward the tent. "The bass is way too high." Brad looked puzzled. "That's not the DJ. That's outside." The vibration grew into a thrumming, a rhythmic beating that felt like it was pressing against their chests. The leaves on the decorative potted plants began to shake violently. The wind picked up, swirling dust and loose napkins across the perfectly set registration table. "What is happening?" Jessica shrieked, grabbing her hair to keep it from whipping across her face. "Is a storm coming?" Tiffany looked up. The sky was clear, but the noise was deafening now. It was a mechanical roar, a sound of churning power that drowned out the music, the chatter and the confusion. It was the sound of air being beaten into submission. From behind the tree line at the far end of the driving range, a dark shape rose. It was monstrous and angular, a silhouette of predatory geometry. Then a second shape rose beside it. Two AH-64E Apache Guardian helicopters broke the tree line. Their noses dipped aggressively forward. They weren't just flying, they were prowling. The sun caught the dull matte black of their fuselages, the massive chain guns tucked beneath the chins, and the hard points on the stub wings loaded with rocket pods. The reunion attendees screamed. People dropped their drinks. The wind from the rotor wash hit the pavilion like a physical blow, sending tablecloths flying and knocking over the sign that said Class of 2014. Tiffany cowered behind the table, her hands over her ears. Brad stumbled back, his beer bottle shattering on the concrete. They watched in terrified awe as the lead helicopter banked hard, circling the driving range with a terrifying grace, while the second one flared, its nose pitching up as it slowed to a hover just 50 yards from the stunned crowd. The sheer violence of the sound was overwhelming. The thwack, thwack, thwack of the blades was a physical pressure wave. The machine hung in the air, a dragon hovering over a gathering of mice. And there, standing perfectly still in the center of the storm, was Bethany Drake. She hadn't moved. The wind whipped her ponytail and rippled the blue fabric of her shirt, but she stood with her feet planted wide, her arms loose at her sides. She wasn't cowering. She was looking up at the metal beast with a look of recognition. The hovering Apache began to descend. The landing gear touched the manicured grass of the driving range, the wheels sinking slightly into the turf. The engines didn't shut down, but the rotors slowed just enough to allow approach. The canopy of the front seat, the co-pilot gunner's station, popped open. A figure in a flight suit climbed out, helmet visor down, moving with the efficient, jerky motions of someone working against rotor wash. The pilot jumped to the ground and jogged toward the perimeter where Bethany stood. He was carrying a helmet bag and a flight jacket. The crowd watched, paralyzed. This wasn't a police raid. This was something else. The pilot reached Bethany. He didn't yell at her to get down. He stopped, snapped to a rigid position of attention, and rendered a sharp, crisp salute. Bethany returned the salute, her motion practiced and effortless. The pilot handed her the flight jacket, a Nomex jacket covered in patches, and leaned in to speak. The crowd couldn't hear the words over the turbine whine, but they saw the body language. It was deference. It was respect. Bethany shrugged on the jacket. It was too big for her, clearly belonging to someone else, but she zipped it up. She turned then, looking back at the pavilion, back at Tiffany and Brad and the ruins of the check-in table. She began to walk back toward them, flanked by the pilot. The second Apache continued to circle overhead, providing a thunderous overwatch that made the very idea of a waitress or class reject seem laughably absurd. As Bethany approached the table, the pilot peeled off his helmet, revealing a young man with a lieutenant's bar on his shoulder. He looked at Tiffany, who was trembling, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Ma'am," the lieutenant shouted over the noise, looking at Tiffany. "We apologize for the disruption. We're here to pick up Chief Drake. Her leave has been rescinded. We need her in the TOC." Tiffany stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Chief Drake." Bethany stopped in front of the table. She looked at the mess of spilled champagne and scattered name tags. She looked at Brad, who was pale and sweating. The lieutenant continued, his voice projecting with military volume. "Chief Warrant Officer Drake is our senior instructor pilot and the battalion's tactical lead. We have a situation that requires her specific expertise on the sensors. She's the only one certified for this flight profile." He turned to Bethany. "Chief, we have your gear in the back. We need to go. Now." Bethany nodded. She looked at Tiffany. The silence between them was filled with the screaming of the turbines, but the power dynamic had inverted so completely it was almost dizzying. "You asked for a name," Bethany said. her voice raised just enough to be heard, calm and cutting. "It's Chief Warrant Officer 3 Bethany Drake, United States Army Aviation. And you're right, Tiffany, I'm not on your list." She reached out and picked up a generic guest name tag that had blown onto the floor. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it back onto the table. "I have my own credentials," she said. She turned to the lieutenant. "Let's go." "Wait." Brad stepped forward, his arrogance replaced by a desperate need to be part of the spectacle. You fly those? That's yours?" Bethany paused. She looked at the blue shirt peeking out from under the flight jacket, the tight top that Brad had mocked. "I don't just fly them, Brad," she said. "I command them. This shirt, it's not for the gym. It's fire retardant base layer, because when I go to work, the office tends to get hot." She turned and walked away, her boots steady on the grass. She walked toward the waiting helicopter, the wind blasting against her, welcoming her back. She climbed up the side of the aircraft, finding the footholds with muscle memory, and swung herself into the front seat. The canopy closed. The engines roared as they spooled back up to full power. The Apache lifted off, nose dipping, and banked hard away from the country club, the second helicopter falling into formation on her wing. They left behind a silence that was heavier than the noise had been. Tiffany stood amidst the wreckage of her event. The balloons were gone. The tablecloths were soiled. The guests were no longer looking at her with admiration for organizing a party. They were looking at the sky where Bethany Drake had just ascended into a world they would never touch. A man in a tuxedo, one of the few who hadn't cowered, walked up to the table. He was an older alumnus, maybe from a class in the 80s who had been invited as a donor. He looked at Tiffany with a mixture of pity and disdain. "You tried to charge her a deposit?" the man asked, shaking his head. "She wasn't on the list," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. The man laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "Lady, that woman is guarding the list. You just tried to card a lion at the petting zoo." The flight back to the airfield was short, a mere 15 minutes of tactical maneuvering that helped Bethany burn off the adrenaline of the confrontation. The emergency wasn't a combat deployment, not today, but a critical readiness exercise that the battalion commander had authorized her to join specifically to facilitate the extraction from the reunion. The cavalry had been a favor from her unit, a group of men and women who knew exactly what she had gone through in high school, because they had shared stories in the bivouacs of dusty forward operating bases. When they landed, the rotors slowing to a halt, Bethany climbed out. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Vance, was waiting on the tarmac. He was a stern man, a father of 3 daughters, and he had been the one to authorize the training flight detour. "Target secure, Chief?" Vance asked, fighting a smile. "Target neutralized, sir," Bethany replied, unzipping the borrowed flight jacket. Vance nodded. "Good. Because we actually do have work to do. But I wanted to make sure you didn't spend your Saturday night being insulted by civilians who measure worth in hashtags." "Thank you, sir," Bethany said. The vindication still hummed in her veins, sweeter than the champagne she had been denied. However, Vance's expression turned serious. "While I support the morale boost, let's remember the lesson here. We don't do this for the applause. We don't do it to show off to high school bullies. We do it because the standard is the standard. You are elite, Drake, not because you have an Apache, but because you possess the discipline they lack. That discipline includes how we handle the aftermath." "I understand, sir," Bethany said. "You're going to get emails," Vance warned. "Apologies, friend requests, attempts to leverage your cool factor. How you respond will determine if you remain an officer or become a celebrity. Silence is the most powerful transmission, sir." Bethany quoted a line from her own flight school days. Exactly. The aftermath came swiftly. By Monday, the video of the Apache landing at the country club had gone viral locally. The caption posted by a reunion attendee read, "When the class reject brings the air support. #badass. Bethany Drake." Tiffany's carefully curated social media presence imploded. Comments flooded her page asking why she had tried to kick out a war hero. The venue, worried about the negative press of mistreating veterans, issued a public statement distancing themselves from the reunion committee. Bethany received the messages Colonel Vance had predicted. Brad sent a DM. "Hey Beth, crazy night. We should grab a drink sometime, catch up for real. Didn't know you were such a badass." Tiffany sent a long rambling email about misunderstandings and stress of hosting, culminating in a request for Bethany to come speak at a charity brunch. Tiffany was organizing to show no hard feelings. Bethany sat in the ready room of the hangar, her phone buzzing on the table. She was wearing her flight suit now, the real one, with the leather name patch that bore her wings and rank. The smell of oil and hydraulic fluid was thick in the air, the perfume of her profession. She looked at the messages. She thought about the blue top, the tight shirt that was designed to not snag in a cockpit, which they had seen as a sign of poverty. She thought about the guest badge. She didn't reply to Brad. She didn't reply to Tiffany. Instead, she typed a single email to the school principal, who had reached out in the wake of the incident. Mr. Henderson, I received your request to speak at the upcoming assembly. I will accept on one condition. The assembly will not be about me, or helicopters or cool military stories. It will be about the definition of value. We need to teach the students that the person standing alone in the hallway might be the one guarding their freedom 10 years later, and that character is not defined by the brand of your clothes but by the weight of your responsibilities. I will be there in uniform, but I will be driving my car. Respectfully, CW3 Bethany Drake. She hit send. A shadow fell over her table. It was the young lieutenant who had picked her up, still looking a bit starstruck by the viral fame of the weekend. Chief, you see the comments online? You're a legend. People are calling you the Apache Queen. Bethany looked up, her expression unreadable. She picked up her helmet, checking the comms cord. Ignore the noise, Lieutenant. Fame is just rotor wash. It kicks up dust and blinds you if you let it. The only thing that matters is the mission. She stood up. Now are you pre-flighted? We have a night run. Yes, Chief. Then let's go. The sky doesn't care who we were in high school. It only cares if we can fly. As they walked out to the flight line, the sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Bethany didn't look back at her phone. She didn't look back at the past. She looked forward, toward the aircraft that demanded everything she had, and gave her the only validation she would ever need, the ability to rise above. Somewhere in a country club parking lot, a group of people were still talking about the girl in the blue shirt. But Bethany Drake couldn't hear them. She was already at altitude, and the reception up there was perfectly clear. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Help us tell more stories of the women who serve and the quiet strength they carry long after the uniform comes off.